Hi, I'm David King-Lassman. This is GigXR, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Emma Collins. Emma, please introduce yourself to everyone.
Hello, everybody. So as David said, my name is Emma Collins. I'm currently working as a professional practice fellow at the University of Otago, and I'm also working as principal lecturer at the Otago Polytechnic, which is the school here in New Zealand who was an early adopter for using this technology, this extended reality technology with our nursing students quite some years ago now. We started back in 2018 when we first started using this technology. So New Zealand, if you don't know, is a tiny wee country near Australia. Quite often on maps you'll see Australia and then New Zealand is missing, but we're actually there. We're off the east coast of Australia, just a bit further south, and we're a long skinny country, very proud nation, and rugby is our main sport. You may have heard of the All Blacks, a lot of people have, and yeah, that's New Zealand really. That's kind of what we're famous for, is the kiwi, which is a flightless bird, and the All Blacks.
And the haka, of course.
And the haka, which goes with the rugby, yes. Yeah.
And
not only with the rugby, it's got a very long, proud tradition, haka.
And I promise I won't ask you to give an example of that, but if anybody's interested, they can look it up. And let me just say that you weren't just an early adopter of extended reality, excuse me, but you were the very first user in New Zealand of GigXR's platform, isn't that right?
Yes, that's correct. And we were the first. And so we felt that we really led the way in New Zealand for bringing this type of technology in to educate our nursing students. And as a result of that, we've been able to help inform a lot of the other nursing schools around New Zealand and around using this technology and engaging with their learners using this really highly dynamic visual platform in a, and we're doing that within this context of, at the moment, of having difficulty for students being able to access real life patients, and so being able to get this visual type of learning in a really authentic way is fantastic for the nursing students.
So visual learning, let's focus on that just for a moment. Why is visual learning so important to you as an instructor and also to the learning experience in general?
Well, nursing as a discipline it's a practical, hands-on discipline for majority of clinicians, and so we can't expect nurses to be ready for the clinical practice environment unless they have adequate practical learning during their training. And often it's really difficult to get access to people when you're a nursing student. There's hospitals are really busy these days. There's a lot of institutions all vying for clinical placements within practice areas. There's a lot of different, the profession of nursing has really expanded around its scope, and so there's a lot of really diverse areas that we can't get students into. So we want students to have a really broad range of experiences, from mental health to primary healthcare, community work, to the more intense inpatient hospital ICU type experiences, emergency care. So there's a massive range, and for students to be able to get that really broad range of experience within a number of different nursing areas is really, really difficult. And we can't expect students to be able to go into all these different environments and get a placement or get an experience, a hands-on practical experience in every single one of these areas. So we need to come up with other ways for students to be able to have a kind of a practical visual exposure, right, to a number of different areas of nursing. So that's where something like extended reality can come in really, really well, because it's a visual medium for education. It's you're not sitting really static, because you're not in nursing. And so when you're using extended reality, you're up, you're out of your seat, you're moving around, you're interacting with the environment, and you are corresponding with other people around you, and it's a visual. You're looking your whole time. Another thing too is that nursing is very much a visual discipline, in that you use your senses for nursing. That's our our greatest tool in our toolbox is our senses. And of course, one of those senses is being able to see. And any nurse can walk into a room and lay their eyes on a patient and know exactly what's going on for them, or, have some kind of awareness of what might be going on for them and what further assessments or treatment might be needed. But it's that first look that you get at the patient, and you get a massive amount of information from laying your eyes on that patient for the very first time. And that massive amount of information, then you've got to be able to triangulate that and work through that massive amount of data that you're receiving.
Right.
So with the extended reality and that visual learning, being able to look at a patient, put on the headsets, look at a patient, and then just say what you're seeing and work through and try and, and then try and work through what you're seeing and how that fits into what might be going on for the patient. So, visual learning is integral to nursing practice.
So, you started talking about the value of extended reality there, but let's think about the universe before mixed reality in particular was in play at your institution. How did you address kind of visual learning in a pre-mixed reality world? What were the challenges you faced as a teacher?
It's really around that authenticity, because we had these really expensive mannequins, and which can do all these different kinds of things. They can breathe, and you can do a blood pressure, and you can get them IV fluids, and you can do a lot of procedures on these mannequins, but they still at the end of the day are plastic and they look like mannequins. They're not moving freely. They don't have facial expressions which tell you that they're in pain. So it's all that, so that was our primary way of being able to engage with that visual learning. And the other primary way really was getting the students to role play. But if you've got a 21-year-old fit, healthy young woman pretending to be a 90-year-old man who's in heart failure, then it's, that's pretty tricky to try. You've got to use a lot of your imagination to try and make that work.
Right. And so I've heard you say in the past that mixed reality has helped you become learner-centric. That fascinated me. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I suppose I was interacting a lot more with the students when I was using mixed reality, because I was standing up with them and I was engaging in discussion with them around what they saw, and then trying to get them to figure out what they saw, what that actually meant for the patient, and then what care they might need to provide for their patient, and that critical thinking type stuff. And I wasn't really getting many other opportunities in my teaching with the students where I was standing over a patient with them and asking them to figure out what they were seeing, and trying to work out what care might need to be provided for the patient. So it gave me a really good perspective then around the students' kind of cognitive processes around how they get from what they're seeing to providing care, and all that's in between that. And so it made me just kind of reflect a lot on that process that they were going through. And therefore I was able to, question them a lot more, and I was able to discuss a lot more, and I was able to, work with them to figure out what was going on for their patients. So that it really helped me a lot as an educator to be a lot more learner-centric and figure out what they needed, what part of that kind of that learning process around getting from A to Z that they needed in the middle.
Right. And in turn, that must have had a really positive impact on the way that they developed as student nurses. I've also heard you say that these kind of technologies help your students think like a nurse, particularly around, taking clinical theory and putting it into practice. I love that, think like a nurse. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, that's a term that's been around for a very long time, being able to think like a nurse, but it's a term that's really, really difficult to quantify. What is thinking like a nurse? And there's been a lot of discussion, a lot of theory, a lot of literature around that thinking like a nurse. And it's kind of centers around that thinking process, that initial assessment that you might do with your patient. So when you walk in the room and you lay your eyes on them for the first time and you notice something about them, and then how that the process that you go through, that cognitive process that you go through to get to the point where you need to provide some kind of care and then evaluate whether or not that care has worked. So there's a number of different processes that kind of reflect that. So there's ADPI, there's just the nursing process, a lot of people just call it, but the one that I'm most familiar with and the one that I quite like is that clinical reasoning cycle. So this was really developed by Tracy Levick-Jones, who's an Australian academic, and she's published a book called Thinking Like a Nurse, and it talks about that nursing process, that cognitive process that nurses go through from noticing something to providing care and evaluating care and all that's in between. So when you're a nurse, like all the experienced nurses who are listening to this are probably thinking, yeah, I do that on a daily basis. And we do. Like when we're experienced nurses, we know that we take a blood pressure and it's really low, which is unusual for that patient. So we think, okay, so maybe they're a bit dehydrated. Let's give them some fluids and see if their blood pressure comes up. And I'll take their blood pressure again in half an hour and see if it comes up. That's a really simplistic example, but that's an example of identifying a problem, thinking kind of from pathophysiological perspective as to what might be going on, then thinking about what's your goal, raise the blood pressure, then thinking, okay, what am I going to do that? I'm going to give them some fluids, and then evaluating it. How am I going to know if it's worked? I'm going to take the blood pressure again. So that process, and quite often the more experienced nurses forget that it's a process because it just comes so ingrained into our thinking like a nurse, that we do it without even knowing that we're doing it. But when you're a student and you're trying to get them to think in that way, and think like a nurse, we've got to break the process down for them into more tangible parts for them to learn, but also tangible parts for us to be able to teach them.
Right.
So yeah, so that's where that thinking like a nurse comes in.
That's fantastic. That's so insightful. So I know that you did this study and you identified a whole bunch of advantages using mixed reality and just to be clear, using HoloPatient, the
Yes.
GigXR product. So can you identify some of those advantages, just describe some of the ones that really resonated with you, why you thought they were particularly compelling?
Well, we've talked already about that visual, being able to assess the patient visually, and the students found that incredible, being able to just visually look at the patient. They don't get any other time in their curriculum where they're standing over a patient, assessing them. We just don't do that in our curriculum. We were standing over someone and talking about them. We might do it behind closed doors. And that sense of realism, we've talked a little bit about that already. But one of the biggest things is around the interactivity of being able to, when we did the research, was the students are able to interact with the teacher and interact with the hologram. So, and a lot of people might say, well, it's a hologram, it doesn't, it's there, but they can still interact with it. So they move around it, they look at different parts, they focus on different parts of the body, they focus on the facial expressions and those kind of but the body language type cues, as well as the physiological cues that they might pick up. So they can get a wide range of interaction with the hologram and visual cues and realism. It all integrates together. It's hard to separate them, a lot of them out. But then they're interacting a lot with each other as students. The way that we do it is we often do it in small groups. So they feed off each other. So they might say, do you think that's a bruise over there by his liver? And someone else might go, yes, I think it is. Maybe that's caused from the seatbelt. And he's, and maybe that's bruising, maybe that could be an indication of internal bleeding. And so they feed off each other and they get that real peer help around the development of what they're thinking. And then, so often we as teachers will take a step back and we'll just let them kind of work it out themselves and work it through themselves around what they're thinking, and they troubleshoot between themselves. And that's what we actually want them to do in clinical practice. We want them to be able to go to their colleagues and say, I've noticed this about Mr. Smith in room 15. Can you come and give me your opinion? And, as humans, we're often not really good at asking for help in a work environment because we don't want to look like we don't know what we're doing. But in healthcare, you can't do that. And so we want to foster this, this thinking of being able to go and talk to your colleagues about your patients to get some help if you need it. So Yeah, so that was one of the key findings. Another key finding is just around being able to really assess a patient and look for those cues and look for that data, that information that you're noticing on a patient. And so the holograms are really great for that, being able to use it for assessment.
Right.
And so we felt that overall that the students are really better prepared for clinical practice because they're getting this experience, which is, they think, and the students told us this, they felt that it was much more authentic experience than other modes of simulation or teaching that was occurring in the school.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think that you've highlighted on one of the really key benefits of extended reality. And if we think about, say, a virtual reality paradigm, where a student is fully submerged in their own universe, you lose that interaction, that connectivity, don't you? And it's really impactful when you see people collaborating and interacting around a hologram. Are you seeing then, how is this translating into raising standards in learning or outcomes? Are you able to identify real improvements in in the way the students are learning, the speed at which they learn stuff, or how quickly they grasp things? Is it tangible?
It's really difficult for it to be tangible, to be fair, because and we know that the gold standard is to have some kind of measure where we can say, yeah, because of teaching clinical reasoning using the holograms, that they're going to be a better nurse, they're going to think better as a nurse. But the fact remains is that they've got a whole heap of other experiences that they're drawing into that, building up of that knowledge around thinking like a nurse. What we can say definitively is that they really engage with this type of learning, and we've got a lot of feedback from the students that say that they really feel that this is a really authentic learning experience, and that they get a great deal from the sessions around that process of getting from A to Z around what's going on for a patient. So, and they enjoy using their technology. They enjoy seeing the patients. They have these little aha moments often as well, where they were like, oh, I didn't see that before, but that now that I can see the large wound on his back, it all makes sense now, So they had these wee moments, and those aha moments are are memorable for them, and because they're memorable, then it's going to kind of consolidate. That learning is going to consolidate a lot more for them. So yeah, it is a difficult thing to measure, but we're working on it.
Yeah.
We're working on measuring it, and certainly we're getting a lot of anecdotal feedback from what we're seeing from the students in clinical placement around their ability to be able to engage in critical thinking, and they're able to move from, oh, I noticed this about a patient, to I noticed this about a patient and it means, and I'm going to then have to do. So we're seeing a lot of anecdotal evidence about that, but being able to kind of, I suppose, cluster it down. But we have done a number of research studies around the clinical reasoning cycle, and we have, and we have noticed a number of different, I'm just trying to get some more quantifiable data for you. So, they, using the headsets, they feel that the patient is a lot more real. That they feel that they're able to process the information gained from the patient. So a lot of this is self-reported data from the student, and that might not be the gold standard data, but it's still really, really meaningful, because it means that the student has engaged in this type of learning, and they really enjoy using this technology. So, and we've got a lot of quantitative data to support that. We're working on getting further data to support that, but yeah.
So you're absolutely right. These are early days. You've been using mixed reality now for just a few years. Let's talk about the future a little bit. Companies like ours that build these technology applications to be used in clinical practices like yours, we're very much informed by the feedback that we get from people like you, Emma. So, where do you think mixed reality is going to go in the next year, 2, 3 years? How do you think it's going to impact or potentially transform the way that you train your students?
Well, I think we're going to see a higher level of interactivity within the holograms. So whether we can, where there's some artificial intelligence built into the holograms, where we can have some kind of level of conversation with the hologram to at least ask them how they're feeling, or can you tell me where the pain is? Because a lot of the times the students would say to me, oh, what's the point of this? I can't actually talk to the patient. My answer to that was always, there's plenty of times when you can't actually talk to your patient, either because they're an infant or they are cognitively impaired or they are unconscious. There's plenty of times when you can't talk to your patient, so you have to pick up on all these other cues. So the holograms are fantastic for building up the use of all your other senses rather than just talking to the patient. But building in that aspect to it would just increase that level of realism and that level of authenticity that is already there. It'll just develop it further. So that'd be really great. And I think that's kind of what I see happening first. And I think I'd also like to see in the future some, we talk about using the senses to assess patients. So one of those senses that nurses use a lot of is touch. Mm-hmm. So, and at the moment, we can't really touch a hologram, but in the future, we might be able to do that with haptics. So we might be able to feel that or get a sensation that the patient feels clammy or feels warm, or that their abdomen's distended and it's not soft to palpate. So, I think that's just where the future's going. There's going to be a lot more interactivity, and it's going to be even more scalable, even more relatable to what we're doing. There's going to be an expanded suite of holograms to choose from, and because the diversity of the patients that we're caring for is expanding. So, and I think we're going to see that in the patients that we're seeing in the holograms as well.
Right. I think that those things that you're identifying, I have a high level of confidence that they will come. They'll probably come sooner rather than later. I know lots of companies are out there working on haptic technology, natural language processing. This technology is only going to get better and better and better. I think from what I'm hearing from people like you, Emma, is that it's going to really make a difference in the way that we train our nurses and doctors of tomorrow. I think that's probably just about it for me. I just want to say that I'm super grateful for the enthusiasm that you bring to extended reality and the way that you're helping inform our business and the industry in general. Thank you so much. Any last words from you?
Not really. I mean, I just think that the better that we are able to educate our young health professionals, then the better care they're going to be able to provide patients. We're all going to be patients. We want ourselves and our family members to have the best level of care that they're ever going to get. And so we've got to start when they're young. We've got to start when they're training. The world's just such an rapidly evolving place. We've just got to keep up.
Emma Collins, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. I'm David King-Lassman. Thank you for watching or listening. We'll see you soon.